The body is an electrical and chemical machine. So we have a few nervous systems in our body. The sympathetic, parasympathetic, the vagus nerve, and then there's an abdominal nervous system as well.
Auricular therapy, which is basically ear acupuncture. It's amazing how powerful the tool is as an entrance point to get to stuff inside of us.
The auricle listens to the oracle.
Warren Whitfield, howdy doodly do. It's nice to
How do.
It's nice to have you in studio. It's nice to be with you and to finally meet you in person. You've got an interesting story to tell us, and I look forward to discussing these big topics that are very important in this day and age with you, namely addiction. We all suffer some kind of addiction, one way or another. Some people more severe than others. I want to jump right into what it is that you practice, because this is what this show is about. It's different facilitators that do different modalities of healing. Yours is auricular therapy, which is basically ear acupuncture.
Correct.
Something I've never personally heard of before I heard of you and met you. And it's interesting to hear how effective it is. I was actually having a conversation with ChatGPT around its history, its origin, and what it's used for, particularly PTSD and addiction and resetting the nervous system. And it's amazing how powerful the tool is, specifically through the ear as an entrance point to get to stuff inside of us. So obviously I don't have all the jargon. That's what your job is, but you can take it away from here.
Okay. Well, auricular therapy in a nutshell simply means ear acupuncture, or therapy of the auricle, which is the outer ear. You have the outer ear, which is this flippy thing made out of cartilage, which looks like, if you look at it closely, it looks like an inverted fetus. It also it's the shape of a kidney. So it's a microsystem for the entire body. And the therapy would be acupuncture or acupressure. You could even use lasers. You could use electrical stimulation. You can use sound. You can also use magnets to stimulate the different acupuncture points on the ear. This part of the ear would be the head, if it's the baby's head, if you look at it, and the brain. And then the center would be the eye. Then you have the spine that runs along here. In the center here is all the organs. And so by stimulating one of the acupuncture points in the ear, what it does is it's actually working with the body's energy flow. So the body is an electrical and chemical machine. That's what we inhabit. This is our avatar in this realm that we're in right now. And it uses chemicals and electricity, and it's also a memory storage device. It burns energy in order to stay functioning, and we need to replenish that energy. But if this machine becomes blocked, like on a car, if your oil filter becomes blocked or your radiator or one of the pipes become blocked, you've got a serious problem with the entire machine. It's not going to work properly. And how acupuncture works, very simply, it's very logical, very scientific, and very measurable. What would happen if I took a piece of metal and I stuck it into a fuse box? There'd be sparks flying. And an acupuncture needle is a piece of metal. And we can measure now what the effect is on the body by putting a piece of metal, a needle, into an acupuncture point. What is the effect? And where does it affect the body? And we have devices now called electropoint stimulators. And what they do is, as you run them along the surface of the skin, when it finds an active acupuncture point, it gives off a little mee. And it's got a little digital readout where you can read the polarity of that meridian. So you can tell whether that meridian has got too many positive charges or not enough positive charges, or too many negative charges or not enough negative charges. And so by putting this piece of metal into this acupuncture point and twirling it a bit, it stimulates the flow of energy. And that's really, in a nutshell, the logic of acupuncture. Very, very simple. The body works on positive and negative electrical charges. So when an organ becomes toxic, whether it's physically toxic or emotionally toxic, it doesn't function properly. The polarity becomes affected. And then in terms of this machine working together as a machine, if you've got one part that's not functioning properly, all the parts are not functioning properly.
Correct.
Very simple.
Yes.
So I was very privileged to go overseas and study in New York at Lincoln Memorial Recovery Center in South Bronx, under the best minds in the world. And I was flabbergasted when I went there and I learned this, and I knew I had to bring this back to South Africa. And I've been doing that for, since 2005. And it's been very difficult, but you've got these mindsets, you've got very dogmatic belief systems that you are working against you. Some people believe that it's evil, because it comes from the East, as if a direction can be evil, So, in the beginning when I started out, I had a lot of resistance and I had to make a choice. Do I leave this and stay with my friends and my network? Because I was really given that choice, and I decided, no, I'm going to carry on with this. And I had to lose a lot of friends, unfortunately.
So I want to ask you, before you go down that road, a bit about the effects of it. So like, what symptoms does it treat, and how does it work in that realm of not curing, but really helping to facilitate a cleaner space to work from when it comes to addiction? So one of the things that you said to me that I found quite interesting is that you cannot heal people or even begin the healing process of somebody who is addicted to, let's say, heroin. Correct. If they are toxic.
Correct.
So you need to flush the body and clean the body first and reset the nervous system, because addicts generally go back to the addiction or go back to using because they feel that cortisol level rising, they feel that anxious feeling. And if you can help to reset the parasympathetic nervous system, that they can function from a much more calm, level-headed mindset rather than needing to just fuel the fire. So I just want you to talk a little bit around who this can actually help.
Sure.
So who are we actually talking to right now?
Well, we're talking to anybody, not just people with addictions.
Yes.
Life on planet Earth is traumatic for everyone. Whether you come from a wealthy family or whether you come from a very poor family, you're going to go through traumatic events in your life. There's emotional abuse, there's molestation, there's violence, there's death, there's relationships ending, there's loss. And everybody, based on their constitution or their level of emotional maturity or life experience, is going to experience those traumatic events very differently. Now, bring toxins into the equation, physical toxins. You've got two types of toxics, two categories, I say. So you've got the physical toxics, which are chemicals, narcotics, pharmaceuticals, alcohol,
food,
the water we drink, the air we breathe, the vegetables we buy in the supermarket with the pesticides. Then we have metals, we have bacteria, fungus, virus, mold. All of these things make this machine not function properly. And they cause what we call a disease, because there's an uneasiness inside the body. And this would be caused by a physical toxin. Then you have the abstract toxins, which would be memories, beliefs, traumas, emotions, paradigms, opinions, judgments. All of these things create a very stressful, toxic paradigm that we live in, and we're not able to function properly because the environment we're living in and our bodies that we're inhabiting and experiencing are not working properly.
Cortisol.
And our minds are not working properly.
Yes.
So the mind and the body are two separate things. but they're completely inseparable. It's a paradox. So if the body's not functioning properly, mind's not functioning properly. And if the mind's not functioning properly, the body's not functioning properly. In fact, the mind relies on the body to function properly in order for it to function properly.
Of course, if you have pain, that's all you can think about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in terms of how this machine works, every single organ in the body has a different emotion that governs it.
Can you give us some examples of that?
Sure. If I gave you a big enough fright, you'd have a
Heart attack.
heart attack. If I made you worried enough, you'd get
Sick to my stomach.
stomach ulcers. Yeah. If I made you afraid enough or terrified, you'd pee in your pants.
Mm-hmm.
So an intense emotion makes the organ that it's related to incredibly weak and it doesn't function properly. And when that's not functioning properly within the body, the whole system is out of whack. So if you become toxic of anger, for instance, which the emotion of the liver and the gallbladder is anger.
Holding on to resentment.
Correct. Anger would grow into resentment. And then ultimately that's unforgiveness, which ends up in bitterness. And bitterness has an extremely toxic effect on the body. One thing that's fascinating to notice over the years through many, many women that have come across my path for treatment is, and especially women, I suppose because of men, but ultimately because of unforgiveness and because of harboring anger, which full-blown ends up with bitterness, they lose their gallbladders.
Wow.
Yeah. So, for instance, they go through a divorce for whatever reason, whatever caused the divorce. And, the lawyers end up with all the money because you can't let go of this anger and you want to punish the other partner. So the fight just continues and evolves into bitterness. And within 6 months of this happening, they lose their gallbladders.
What is the function of the gallbladder?
The gallbladder produces bile for the body to help the digestive process. And so when the gallbladder becomes toxic, it develops gallstones.
Yes.
And, if you get small gallstones, you can treat that. You can treat that with diet. You can treat that with acupuncture, with herbal formulas. But if the gallstones are too big, you have to remove the gallbladder and then your life changes. Now you don't have bile to assist the digestive process. And that has effect on the rest of your life. You have to eat very, very carefully.
Is it because those unexpressed emotions, for instance, the anger and the rage, if you're not expressing it in a healthy manner and releasing it, then you're storing that energy.
Correct.
And it doesn't have a place to go. Why do you think people hold on to this stuff and don't release it as easy?
Because they haven't found an empowering perspective of it.
Wow, that's interesting.
So the way we experience our environment and our world that we live in really boils down to the way we see it. Our eyeballs, as Tony Robbins says. And the difference between a rich man and a poor man is their eyeballs. It's how they see the world. One man sees a hurdle to be overcome. Another man sees an obstacle that cannot be overcome. And so you can see an experience in your life as something that is shaping you, that's going to help you, and it's going to help you help others ultimately. That's really, I think, the ultimate point of every experience that we have in our lives is to learn to help others. And in the process, we're helping ourselves. We become more functional. We become happier. So until we develop that empowering perspective, the body is going to hold on to it. The organ's going to hold on to it. The mind is going to replay it over and over and over and over until you get an empowering perspective. That's really what processing trauma boils down to, is developing an empowering perspective of what happened and using that weakness as your weapon instead. Ultimately, it boils down to a choice, but it's still a lesson. And until you've learned the lesson,
it'll keep repeating itself.
Correct. So, you could say that some people are addicted to drama. Ultimately, they haven't learned the lesson. They're trying to change a result by doing the same thing over and over. So they haven't learned the lesson. They haven't learned, if I'm going to change the situation, I need to try something different.
So is it familiarity with a situation?
I think it's plain old simple fear.
Fear of what?
Fear of the unknown, fear of power, fear of losing your, at least in the drama, I
know what's hard to navigate.
Correct. But I don't know what's outside of the drama. I've never experienced that. So there's a fear of that. There's a fear of the unknown. And sometimes it's just plain old simple, an addiction. Some people use their disempowered situation in order to benefit themselves. They'll use their weakness in order to prey on other people's compassion in order to manipulate them. Some people will use their sickness. I had a client who had Parkinson's, so 2 clients. One had incredibly good results. The other one stopped at the 6th session, and I had no idea why, because she was starting to see the results. And I don't chase people. People need to chase. If you want something, you've got to go out and do it. I can't do it for you. You can't help people
who don't want to help themselves.
Yeah, I'll be there to help you through the process. But you've still got to come. You've still got to make the appointment. You've still got to come. You've still got to sit there, take the needles in your ears and relax for 45 minutes. And she stopped coming. And about 2 weeks later, I bumped into the homeopath that referred her to me. And she said, how's so-and-so doing? And I said, I don't know. She just stopped coming at 6 treatments. She said, I thought that might happen. Really? Why? She said, well, there's a wealthy couple in the church that have compassion and feel sorry for her, and they're giving her money so she doesn't have to work. And so I think when she saw the tremors dropping significantly, she got afraid of, oh no,
losing the money.
Now I've got to go out and find a job. I might not like the job. And then I'm back to square one, and now I don't have that safety net. And so maybe I'll just stick to what I know because it serves me right.
It's funny also, what's that saying? No good deed goes unpunished. You think you're doing someone a favor by helping them out financially, but actually you're almost doing them a disservice because that's not empowering.
Yeah.
Just to give somebody money.
Yeah, I was watching a television show, I think it's called Homestead Rescue. And the older guy, Marty, who always wears white shirts, and a cowboy hat and a white mustache. He sort of takes this young guy under his wing whose father died, and he shows him how to do it and then tells him to do it and leaves him alone. And throughout the whole episode, this guy becomes completely empowered.
Yes.
By not doing it for him.
I distracted us from this conversation. So you were saying that we have the physical side of toxicity, because I was asking about the different ailments that this process can help, not only for PTSD and addiction, but for life in general, to rid ourselves of toxins, to sleep better, to have a more balanced system. So you were saying that you get the physical toxins and then you get the emotional toxins.
Yeah.
And you were saying that the different, like a gallbladder, is anger and resentment. What are the lungs?
The lungs is sadness and grief.
Okay.
What's fascinating is especially older couples who've been married for a very long time and one of the partners dies. If they're not able to process that grief easily, the lungs become very weak and then they're susceptible to a lung infection. And it can end up very badly in pneumonia and double pneumonia and even dying.
And the heart? The
heart is fright and joy. The heart and the small intestine are the same organ system. So if the heart becomes emotionally toxic, you're going to become easily frightened and you're going to lack joy, very simply.
And what does the small intestine do?
The small intestine absorbs nutrients from food.
Wow.
So you're not going to absorb things as well. You're not going to be able to process things.
It's funny because you're not going to be able to absorb the stuff that you take in or ingest.
Correct.
But in general, with life, if you're fearful, you're not going to absorb any of the goodness of life either.
Correct.
So it all plays into each other.
Correct. In terms of the mind, if I try and teach you something, you're not going to get the point of it.
Yes.
You're not going to be able to absorb it and be able to assimilate to it and be able to use it because you just don't have that ability. The stomach and the spleen are the same organ system as well.
What does the spleen do?
The spleen breaks down old blood cells. As blood cells become old, they need to be broken down. When the stomach or the spleen become toxic, we're not able to make a decision, and we end up with a very busy mind. And so this is where ADHD comes from. Not able to focus, not able to be decisive, and have just intrusive thoughts all the time.
Okay.
So if you want a quiet mind, you've got to have a healthy stomach and a healthy spleen.
Which most of us don't.
And the lungs and the large intestine, besides the lungs and the problems that arise from toxicity, the large intestine eliminates waste. And so people who are toxic from sadness or grief, they're going to end up with IBS. They're going to have a problem eliminating waste. And that's life-threatening. At the end of the day, if you're not able to eliminate waste, you can end up with diverticulitis, where the intestines form these polyps in which waste stays and starts to rot, which can turn to cancer. And colon cancer is pretty serious. The survival rate of people with colon cancer is probably 5 years.
Wow.
That's if they have access to good services.
And what about things like lupus?
Ultimately, any kind of
autoimmune
disease, you have to treat the gut. You've got to treat the gut. So that's the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, whole digestive system, the liver and the gallbladder. So the entire system has to be treated. And going on intermittent fasting, but also having a good prebiotic and probiotic diet. And that's what I use to help my colon function properly. Now I've just been using sauerkraut, and I find that by adding it to meals, my digestive system just works.
Yes.
So you have good bacteria and you've got bad bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
And if the bad bacteria is flourishing and you don't have the good bacteria, you're going to have serious autoimmune conditions. You're going to have serious mental conditions, mental health issues.
Is that because in terms of your gut health, your gut's obviously very linked to your brain?
Correct.
And then also your whole digestive system as a whole, and you get leaky gut if you don't start looking after your gut health and the bacteria. But in terms of autoimmune diseases, is that triggered because your system's kind of shutting down and it can't really fight anymore, and so you're more susceptible, like you said, with the lungs not being able to function well, so then you're more susceptible to getting pneumonia? Is it a similar thing in terms of your gut health? Why is your gut health so important?
Because of very, very simply how we assimilate energy and how we get rid of the waste. And if it stagnates in the gut, you end up with diverticulitis. You end up, your colon splits slightly, and you end up having waste leaking into your blood. So you end up with bad bacteria in your blood. You end up with parasites in your blood. A while ago, I went for a live blood analysis, and the incredible practitioner who did it for me, they show it to you on the screen. They show you, this is a white blood cell. You've got too many white blood cells. You've got an autoimmune issue. But let's have a look a little bit closer. And then you see these little parasites. And there's more parasites in my blood than there's blood cells. She said, you've got a very, very serious problem. You need to deal with this. So I had to go on a radical cleanse in order to get rid of the parasites in your blood, because that's just going to end up as some form of cancer in the body. So having waste floating around your blood, and the blood traveling through the whole body, through your lungs, through your brain, through every part of your body, is not good. Your mind is not going to function properly. There's a chemical process involved in logic. There's a chemical process involved in making a decision.
Yes. And
if you don't have the right chemicals in your body, you're just going to struggle to even be able to see logic.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this treatment, you go in for 45 minutes, you put the needles into the acupuncture points in the ear, and generally when you do it, it's basically treating, if I come in and I say I've got a gallbladder issue, you would specifically focus on that, or is it just an overall healing for?
Well, I specialize in the NADA 5-point protocol, which is only 5 needles in each ear. And that was actually brought to the West by somebody who went to China. It was actually discovered in the East by a guy by the name of Dr. Wen, who was using it to help heroin addicts or methadone addicts get off of their drugs and how they were treating their drugs, and had a very, very good effect. It was published in an article in a newspaper in New York, and it was discovered then and implemented in New York because there was a massive drug problem. So that's how I got into it, simply by wanting to be a more effective counselor, because I was noticing that the logic, I just wouldn't grasp it. And when you're treating somebody who comes in with a mental illness or an addiction, they're very, very toxic. They're toxic emotionally, they're traumatically, and also physically from all of the toxins they've been putting in their system. So the starting point, as we mentioned earlier, is detoxification. In other words, consciously and intentionally and physically removing the toxins from this machine, this system, so that it could function properly. Traditionally and currently, there seems to be a shift towards using more alternative methods now in rehabs and the top rehabs, using things like yoga and meditation and that sort of stuff. But acupuncture still has to be grasped by the rehabs in this country. So that's how I got into it, for the sole purpose of helping people with addictions and mental health challenges. I discovered through the process, and it made perfect scientific and logical sense, that by helping these toxic people, other things that they were suffering with suddenly started getting better, And that absolutely blew my mind. I was taught these things overseas, but to then experience it in person was just amazing. And then for a while, I even stepped away from addiction, and I just wanted to learn everything about helping people through a simple 5-point protocol to detox the body so that they would become better, so that their bodies would function properly and the dis-ease in their body would go away. And that was my theory. And that's the theory of Chinese medicine in a nutshell, is that all disease in the body or mind is caused by the presence of a toxin. So logically, if you remove the toxin, the disease is going to go away. I gave a talk at a community center in Rivonia, in the early days when I started out. And there was a woman in a wheelchair at the back of the hall. And I said, if anybody wants to talk to me afterwards, I'll be available at the back of the hall. She sat and she waited very patiently for me, and she was the last one. And she said, I'm paralyzed because of mercury poisoning. 5 years ago, I found a little plastic bottle, it was about this big, with mercury in it. And I had no idea that mercury was toxic. The knowledge or the information had never crossed her path. So to her, she knew what mercury was. It was a heavy liquid metal. And it is quite heavy if you play with it. I've played with it before, but luckily not too much.
So she consumed it?
No, she just played with it with her hands. We absorb toxins through our hands as well.
Yes.
We've got to be very careful of the things we touch and what we wash our hands with. And
what we
alcohol sanitizers, anything our hands become into contact with, we can absorb through our hands. And we also excrete through our feet, which is why a lot of people end up with smelly feet, because they're detoxing. We also detox through our sweat glands. So your body odor changes, your armpits. You can bath as much as you want, but if you're going through a detox process, your armpits are going to pong. And so she had played with this mercury, and she said, can you help me? And I said, look, logically I can. This is what I've been taught, but I've never done it before. She said, well, will you help me? I said, I'm willing.
Try.
I'm willing to. She said, how much do you charge? I said, well, I don't know what to charge you because I've never done it before, and my conscience won't allow me to charge you for something that I've got no experience in. And she said, well, I can't afford to pay you anyway. And I said, okay, well, I said, there's no problem. As long as we work through the whole treatment plan, I'm willing to go through this learning process with you. And she said, do you like chocolate brownies? I said, chocolate brownies are part of the reason I came to this planet. And she said, okay, I'll make you chocolate brownies once a week.
Yeah.
And And that was the exchange that we did. And I always try to teach my students that I teach never to turn away anybody, because it's going to be a learning experience for you. And I'm so glad I didn't, because it was a very difficult detox process. You know, when you're detoxing heavy metals like mercury, the excretion process isn't pleasant. And people go through what is referred to in Chinese medicine as a health crisis or a healing crisis, which is things can get worse before they get better, which is quite logical. You know, if you've got a broken leg and we've got to reset the leg, it's not going to be pleasant. You're going to hear bones crunching. You're going to feel those bones crunching. It's going to be painful, but it's got to be done.
Like cleaning out a wound.
Yeah. Like you've got a boil, for instance, it's got to be lanced, you know, and that's not pleasant. It's disgusting. And I gave her 9 treatments initially. I saw her 3 times a week for 3 weeks. And she was struggling. She even told her daughter where her will was in case she died. And I said to her, look, from what the people in New York have told me, you're not going to die, but it's going to feel like you're dying.
Yes.
Yeah, so she took a 2-week break. Her daughter gave her some time sharing and to go away for a holiday for a break. And when she came back, she walked into my office wearing a beautiful summer dress.
Wow.
And her favorite shoes that she hadn't worn in 5 years because her feet were so swollen.
Wow.
And I saw her for another 6 treatments, so 15 in total, at which point she said to me, I think we're done. I'm feeling great. I've got what I wanted out of this.
That's unbelievable.
And I said, wonderful. So good
what
luck
a testimony, hey?
Yeah, so, you know, this is part of the, you know, if you want to grow, if you want to heal, you've got to go through the entire process. You've got to be committed to it. It doesn't matter what that is in your life. If you want to become a lawyer, you know, and you don't have the money to go to law school, then you're going to have to get a job, you know. You're going to have to save. You might have to get 2 jobs in order to pay for your studies. You're going to have to do your articles. You're going to have to start from the bottom.
There's a process.
There's a process involved in everything.
So how do you come up with the protocols for people in terms of how many sessions that you initially...
Well, this is always the question my students ask me as well, is how many treatments does somebody need? The answer is always as required. Some people are going to need a lot of treatment. Some people are going to need very few. It's the client who actually has the power in their hands, because they're the one who tells us
how they're feeling.
Correct.
Okay, got you.
And so once it's worked for them, they say, I think we're done. Instead of the practitioner who's pulling them through the process. We're very suspicious of anything. So how many treatments am I going to need? Well, you could need 10, you could need 30. Oh, sounds like a money-making scheme to me. Well, the thing is, I can't predict.
Yes.
I had 2 women with hormonal problems. They were best friends. They insisted on coming to the treatment together to save time, and they traveled together. And the one woman started experiencing results as from the first treatment. By the 9th treatment, the other woman still hadn't experienced anything. And she was feeling like she was being robbed. But by the 9th treatment, she suddenly started experiencing benefits. And her goal was also to lose weight. But she wasn't able to, she had no willpower. And willpower comes from the kidneys. So if we've got weak kidneys, we're going to really struggle with willpower. And to become decisive, to make a decision and stick to it, comes from the spleen and the stomach. So they were both in their early 50s. One was overweight, the other one wasn't. The one that was overweight took longer.
She had more toxins.
Correct. She was far more toxic, but they still required 15 treatments in total for both of them in order to get the results they were looking for.
Okay. I heard it's helpful for people who want to stop smoking.
Yes, it is. It's very, very helpful. You know, smoking is a very, very powerful addiction, and learning to help people with smokers using the 5-point protocol it took me 7 years to learn how to treat a smoker.
Okay.
Quite different from treating somebody with cocaine, for instance, or crack cocaine or ecstasy or whatever.
Why is it different?
Because of the amount of toxins you're trying to let go of in a cigarette. In 1996, 6 tobacco companies released a list of 600 chemicals that are in a cigarette.
That is shocking. And imagine with vapes, how many chemicals there
Well,
are.
there's normally about 3.
Really?
Yeah, major difference. But the method of delivery to the nervous system is far quicker and far purer. So it is quite a stronger addiction than smoking, but far healthier. And this nonsense of popcorn lung is just not true. That's I believe, propaganda from the cigarette industry to try and people to stop people from vaping. But now, since cigarette companies have bought into vape companies, that propaganda has suddenly disappeared. But yeah, it took me 7 years to learn how to treat a smoker, and you've got to treat a smoker the same way you treat a heroin addict.
So what's the
protocol? So you've got to work with the body and the mind.
Okay.
Yeah. What's fascinating with smokers is they all start for the same reason.
Which is?
Because of a dis-ease inside of them, an uneasiness. What addiction is in a nutshell is self-medicating, placating our bodies, placating our bodies, however you pronounce it, soothing the pain that we're experiencing on an emotional or a physical level inside of us. Whether it's physical or emotional pain, it's not a pleasant place to be. Most smokers start at a very young age. Some start in their mid-20s, once they've left school. But the reason is very simple. If we look back in history, how the cigarette industry marketed themselves, all desire comes from a place of lack. So if I'm experiencing lack within myself, I'm going to desire something in order to get rid of that experience of lack inside myself. And so the cigarette companies preyed on that. We know if we can get people to experience lack and show them that this is what people who are supposed to be complete do, then people are going to desire to do that in order to experience a place of completeness inside themselves. Yeah. People who learn to smoke in school are people who ultimately have a low self-worth and are easily influenced by people who they supposedly look up to, who we think, I'll always ask people who smoke, so can you remember, the first cigarette you took a puff of? And some of them will say no, but most people can remember the first one.
Made them feel awful.
Of course.
But they went back.
Correct. So why is it that somebody would persist in something that
is so
tasted
vile?
Terrible.
Vile,
yes, stinks, made you dizzy, may have even made you nauseous and vomit.
Yes.
Why would you persist in that? Why? Because there's a payoff at the end, and that payoff is to be included and not rejected. I want to belong. So if I do this, I'll belong to that group of people.
It's social.
Yeah, it's just a sense of wanting to belong. And the thing is, when a smoker stops, that same feeling comes back.
Yes.
Because now I don't belong to the smokers group anymore. So now I don't really fit in. I can't really go to those places anymore because then I'm going to carry on smoking.
Yeah.
So my whole lifestyle has to change. My friends even have to change.
And the anxiety, like I'm not addicted to anything in my life where we have to. Like the world is going to end if we don't get this thing. And like you say, it is like an addict. It's not normal for people to behave in a way that's like, I can't deal with what's going on inside my body. I'm having such withdrawals that I need to get a fix. I need to get a hit of this nicotine.
Well, ultimately, people are not addicted to nicotine. They're not addicted to alcohol. They're not addicted to cocaine or heroin or gambling or sex or pornography. They're all addicted to dopamine in their brain. It's a hormone that makes you feel a certain way. It's your own chemistry. And whatever we're doing, whatever activity or substance we're engaging in is getting our brain to produce dopamine, which makes us feel that way. But you can get dopamine to be secreted by simply going, take a deep breath, oxygenate your brain. The brain gives you dopamine as a reward. So breath work is very, very powerful as well because it helps you regulate your nervous system. I teach people you can take a 1-minute holiday.
Yes.
Instead of taking a 10-minute smoke break, just take a 1-minute holiday. Sit down, take a deep breath in through your nose, and just relax. Let your shoulders drop. Let your whole body just relax.
But it's easier said than done. I mean, you vape, for instance.
Yes.
Why have you not been able to cut the habit of putting those toxins into your body?
To be honest, because I just actually don't want to yet.
Okay.
Well, that's not true. I do want to, but I don't want to enough. It hasn't got to the point where I've really just made a decision and done it.
Okay.
I was never a smoker at school. It was only after school that I started smoking. And I started smoking through smoking marijuana because people mixed marijuana with tobacco
yes.
to keep it burning. And then I started craving cigarettes just from smoking marijuana mixed with tobacco. That's when I started smoking. I quit for 8 or 9 years, and then I started again. And I actually started when I was volunteering in a rehab. And everybody in the rehab was smoking. And it was so uncomfortable for me. Everything stank.
Can't beat him, join him.
Yeah. And eventually it was just give me a cigarette.
Yeah.
Just get this over with so that I don't end up having to smell that horrible stink.
Yeah. I find ex-addicts smoke like chimneys. Jeez, 2 packets, 3 packets a day. And they think, well, at least I'm not on heroin anymore. But still, you're putting the most vile toxins into your body constantly. So you're never, ever going to experience what it feels like to be like completely healthy.
Ask any heroin addict what's harder to quit, cigarettes or heroin. And I'll tell you cigarettes.
Crazy.
Which is why rehabs will recommend that you don't stop smoking if you're trying to give up some kind of substance like alcohol or cocaine or heroin or whatever.
Because otherwise you just go psychotic.
And you'll see that recovering addicts will just become sugar addicts afterwards. They become addicted to sugar because, they'll always have coffee at meetings and they'll have like 4, 5, 6 sugars in their coffee and strong coffee because that just sugar stimulates dopamine in the brain. So they've just stepped from one addiction to the other. But recovery is a process.
Yes, it is.
It takes time. Ultimately, you have to get to the point of readiness. And you can get to that point of readiness because of losing everything and nobody wants anything to do with you. Or you can get to the point of readiness because of mental or physical illness or financial reasons because of all of these things. And that will bring you to your place of readiness, or what we would also refer to as your rock bottom.
Yes.
Where change becomes more profitable for you than continuing.
Yes.
We take the path of least resistance. So whatever is going to be easier for us, we're going to do. It's going to be easier for me to quit than to carry on like this because life is going to be better for me. So I'm going to experience things differently. So that's when the readiness comes.
I want to ask, what is your dream for this practice in South Africa specifically? And what do you think the disconnect is in terms of rehabs not implementing this, even though it's got such an effective or high rate of success? Where's the disconnect? What do people not understand?
Rehabs have a very structured day, and they've only got so many hours in a day. And they do what they think works. If you've got 30 clients in your rehab, now you want to introduce acupuncture, you're going to have to somehow find another 2 hours in your day. After hours is time for homework and time to go to meetings, recovery meetings like AA or NA or whatever. So there's not enough hours in the day within a 28-day program. Plus, now if you have to incorporate acupuncture, someone has to do it, which means they have to incorporate the cost of training that person and paying that person, which could be an outside person, a practitioner already exists, or training somebody else in their existing business, but now they have to pay them more because now they're doing something else as well. So it's not necessarily easy to implement for those reasons, but it's not expensive either.
Precisely, which is why it doesn't make sense why they wouldn't just add it into the protocol and then make the end user pay for it. So for instance, another 500 Rand on everyone's bill at the end of that month wouldn't make that much difference to the people paying, but it would make a massive difference in terms of how they recover.
And the problem is that when people enter recovery, they've normally exhausted all of their finances and they've taken advantage of their families.
Yes.
And then it gets to such a bad point where the families finally make a decision. And most people, 90% of people with an addiction problem cannot afford to go to rehab. So to push up the cost is also controversial, charging people more. So it's not necessarily, it's very, very doable, but it's not necessarily easy.
Okay.
I have had rehabs that have been very open and willing to do it and implement it in their rehabs. I had one guy who shut down his rehab and decided to do it full time because he was getting better results by doing the Acu-Detox with people. And he runs a few free clinics in the drug-ridden areas of Cape Town and the Cape Flats, like Hanover Park and Tafelsig and Mitchell's Plain, And he has free community clinics. Wonderful Muslim man, just has a compassion for serving and helping people. And for him, it's not about money. For him, it's about serving his fellow man and helping people. Ultimately, that really was what we would refer to as the spirit of NADA. So auricular therapy and Acu-Detox was formalized under the National Acupuncture Detoxification Association in the US, or NADA, and has since spread to 40 countries over the last 40 plus years. But the spirit of NADA has always been to never put profit before helping people, ideally provided for free, because it's not that expensive to provide a treatment. A box of needles costs 85, 90 Rand for 100 needles. Box of alcohol swabs costs maybe between 60 and 90 Rand for 200 alcohol swabs. So a treatment costs you 10, 11 Rand for one treatment in terms of physical materials, plus your time, and then plus the environment, in terms of wherever you're providing it. So it's quite possible for people to get involved in doing it if they want to serve their communities. There are community centers. There are churches churches let people from AA and NA come there and use their halls. So there are many places that people could do it in the community if they want to serve their community. But ultimately, at the end of the day, somebody's got to pay for the needles. Somebody's got to pay. And, the person who's doing it, they still have expenses. They still got to feed themselves. They still got to put a roof over their head, pay for their children's education. And, these are the challenges in terms of implementing it in a community setting. But there are many, many people who actually just want to give back and serve their communities and do it just solely for that purpose. I've always said, charge the rich and give it to the poor. Be like Robin Hood, you have to steal it. But you can go and provide a good service to people who can afford to pay for it, and then use that to provide it for free in communities that can't afford to pay for it. That, at the end of the day, was the spirit of NADA, is the spirit of NADA, and will always be the spirit of NADA internationally. But I teach my students how to do that, how to pay their bills so that they can help people who can't afford to pay for it. The very difficult balance to find is people can take advantage of you as well, and they can afford to pay for it, but they plead poverty. Sure. But yeah, so my goal over the last 15 years is I've gone from practicing into teaching, and I became a international trainer 10 or 11 years ago. I think I practiced for 6 years first, submitted all of my case files to the US, and then became an internationally certified trainer. And then I started teaching people, initially just one person, and then one or two people, and then it grew. It's something that can also be learnt online, but ideally needs to be learnt in person in order to how to insert the needle and where to insert the needle. But auricular therapy is a very simple protocol, and there's no risk involved. It's not like body acupuncture where you can hit a bone, a nerve, an artery, a tendon. Auricular therapy, you're working with skin, a little bit of fatty tissue, and cartilage. There are hundreds of tiny little blood vessels in the ear in order to give it blood. Sometimes there is maybe 1 out of every 10 needles is a tiny drop of blood. And what's interesting is that the discomfort people feel, if people feel discomfort from having a treatment, it's normally because that part of the body is toxic. There's a blockage there. And that's how we measure progress. Because you might have a point today, for instance, the liver point, you put the needle in, and people will make this facial expression, and I'll say to him, was that sore? And then they go, yeah, can't you see, kind of thing. I say, excellent, fantastic. They go, what do you mean?
Working on something.
What do you mean excellent? I say, well, it means there's a problem there.
Yeah.
Now we can measure, because by the end of your treatment plan, the whole process will be completely painless. You should just be feeling like touching on your ear. In the meantime, a needle is 3 to 4 millimeters deep in your ear. So, and you'll see that the toxicity bounces from point to point as well, the discomfort. And that's the blockage working its way through the system. You know?
What other modalities do you find this would work well with?
That's the beauty of AcuDetox. First of all, it's not a standalone modality. It's not a be-all and end-all. It can work by itself. It certainly can. But ideally, it should be a modality that complements any other modality. And there's no other modality that it doesn't complement. You can use it with reflexology, with massage, with counseling or trauma counseling, or homeopathy, or herbal formula, or change in diet, exercise. It complements anything.
So could somebody be having a foot massage whilst?
Ideally, they shouldn't be done at the same time. They
Okay.
should be 2 separate sessions, in my opinion. Because the first needle that one puts in is the sympathetic point. So we have a few nervous systems in our body. We have the sympathetic, which is our fight or flight nervous system. And then we have the parasympathetic, which is our rest and recovery and our healing nervous system. That's how we heal. And then we have the vagus nerve, which runs from the brain, which connects all of the organs. And then we have there's an abdominal nervous system as well, which surgeons have learned the hard way over time from doing, massive incisions to being as less invasive as possible. You're doing keyhole surgery now in order to not damage the nervous system of the abdomen. But most people are living in the sympathetic nervous system. They're living in fight or flight because of the world we live in, planet Earth. Whatever's going on the planet right now is pretty frightening. So most people are just trying to survive. They are living in this heightened state of awareness and fear, which ultimately is toxic. It's too acidic. So the first needle we put in is a sympathetic, and what that does is it helps people change from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic. And so people will just relax.
And where does that go in the ear?
That goes in over there. So this little part of the ear here is called the helix. This part of the ear is called the helix. And then it's got this little flap here.
Yes.
So it's just underneath this flap in line with, this is the antihelix part of the ear, this bridge here. So you would line the needle along that, the antihelix, and then slide it between the two, like sort of
in that pocket.
In that soft part between the flap of the helix and the inferior crust of the antihelix, into that, between the two, not in either, but literally between the two.
Okay, so that activates the parasympathetic
Correct.
nervous
Takes
system.
people out of sympathetic into parasympathetic.
Okay.
And, people, it's almost instant. People start to relax.
Amazing.
The next point we treat is the Shen Men, which in Chinese directly translated means spirit gate. You could say that that's a spirited child, or that's a free spirit. That person's a free spirit. So there's 2 meanings to it. There's the spiritual, and then there's the vitality. So that point would refer to the vitality. But interestingly, the effect that it has on the body on a metaphysical level is it opens the heart.
Okay.
So people's closed hearts become open, and they become open to change.
Yeah, that's your chi, is the vitality, hey?
Chi, yes, certainly is vitality, but it's openness.
Okay.
Vitality also comes from openness. It comes from, I want to learn, I want to experience everything, teach me,
Mm-hmm. And where in the ear is that?
That's in there's a little sort of indented area over here.
Okay, yes, I can feel
And
it.
it's in the top corner over there.
Okay.
And the Shen Men, what it does is it opens the heart. People become open to change, but also dilates the blood cells.
What does that do?
Well, it helps the the blood cells detox.
Okay.
And it helps the free flow of H2O and water and energy, and helps toxics come out of the blood cells. Then the next point is the kidney point, which is directly underneath the Shenmen.
Okay.
Under this,
Yes,
at the highest point, or if you don't have a ridge like I do, that's that deep behind there. Some people just have it just goes flat. So you would aim for the middle of that area anyway. And that's the kidneys, and the kidneys obviously help balance salt in the body. They also help eliminate waste, uric acid. But the emotion of the kidneys is fear. So it helps people just let go of fear. Weak kidneys, people have problems with the lower part of the body. They'll have lower back problems with their hips, problems with their knees, strength in their legs as well, all from kidney weakness. You want to help somebody with lower body strength, treat the kidneys.
Wow, that's
so
interesting.
it's not just exercise, you've
Yes.
also got to detox your kidneys. The next point is the liver. And as we know, the liver and all of these points are organ systems themselves. So except for the Shenmen and the sympathetic, first two. So the first one, by treating the kidney, you're also treating the urinary bladder, because the kidney and the urinary bladder are the same organ system. So the next point is the liver. We treat the liver, we're treating the liver and the gallbladder. There is a gallbladder point. There's a separate point for everything. But the effect is it's going to have an effect on that whole organ system. And that's going to help people let go of anger. And then right in the center of this cavity, this cavity here is called the cavum concha. Right in the center of it is the heart, and just on either side of it are the lungs. The top part is the right lung. Just underneath the center point is the left lung. And by treating that point, we're helping people let go of sadness and grief, which has a very positive effect on depression. Also asthma. People who struggle with asthma. I've had incredible results with asthma, treating people with asthma. And all of them will burst out. If anybody's holding on to sadness, you put a needle in and all of a sudden it's like the liquid squirts out of their eyes. And some of them will cry for 45 minutes. I had one woman that I helped with interstitial cystitis, which is ulcers in the bladder. She was 72. She was suffering for 36 years. It's an extremely painful condition, having ulcers in your bladder.
I can't imagine.
And she had to urinate every 10 minutes, so she couldn't leave the house. And the doctor said, look, we don't know how to treat this. We can cut out your bladder and make a new one out of your intestine, which she didn't want to do. Or just take citrus soda and avoid anything acidic, which is how she lived for 36 years. By the time her grandson brought her to me, she was literally skin and bone. She was taller than me. She had to be carried in. She was wearing an adult nappy. And the look on her face was like this, which is terror, fear. Just your emotions you express on your face. So there's even face diagnosis. You can look at people's faces and tell what emotions they're struggling with. So I said to her, look, what happened just before this pitched up? Something happened in your life where you were either emotionally toxic, you went through some kind of trauma, or you were physically poisoned. You went through some kind of toxic event. And she said, my 12-year-old son died. And she burst into tears. Now, somebody who's 76 and it had happened 36 years prior shouldn't burst into tears. They should have processed it by then and be able to talk about it from an empowered perspective. So the fact she was bursting into tears showed me she hadn't processed that trauma. She was still toxic. And I said to her, if you can, please, very important, just tell me what happened. She said, well, I bought a couch from the OK Bazaars and it was delivered. I just got home from work and I was busy cooking. And my son couldn't help carry it in, but he carried the cushions and was all covered in plastic. I signed for it. They put it in the lounge and off they went. And I went back to the kitchen and I asked him to take the plastic off. And, got the stove stable and went back to the lounge, and he was pale. He said, "Mom, I'm not feeling good." And she said, "Well, lie down on the couch." She could see, there's a major change in him. She said, "Well, just lie here. Let me just carry on cooking and I'll check on you just now." She came back and he was worse. She said, "Just go lie down in your room. Let me finish cooking. If you're not feeling any better, maybe we'll take you to the doctor." And while she was sort of ending off cooking, she heard the death rattle, which is, you'll hear nurses talk about the death rattle. It's a gurgling sound people make when they're busy dying.
My goodness.
And she rushed to the bedroom, and there he was busy dying. She rushed him to the hospital. He died the following morning. And when she was leaving the hospital, the doctors and the nurses were giving her dirty looks. And she looked at them as if to say, "Why are you looking at me like that, And they looked at her and said, "What did you do to him?" She said, "I didn't do anything to him." She said, "Well, he's been poisoned." So she was a suspect, and they investigated her. And this went on for a whole year until the police finally closed the case. And, the couch was covered in material that was imported. And the container above it on the ship had pesticide in, which leaked onto the material roll, and the couch is made out of this material. But she was toxic of grief and toxic of the physical toxins as well. So it made the lungs and the large intestines not functioning properly. And what follows on from the lungs and the large intestines is the kidneys and the urinary bladder. So ultimately what it was doing was it was causing too many positive charges to end up, too much yang, as the Chinese would say. And heat or too many positive charges causes a dry, ulcered environment. So ultimately what she needed to do was detox her lungs.
Okay.
And she needed trauma counseling and grief counseling.
Yes.
But the 3 treatments, she sobbed and sobbed and sobbed for the whole 45 minutes. But what was interesting was after I put the needles in, now this was a woman that had to go to the toilet every 10 minutes. She sat there for 45 minutes and didn't go to the toilet. At the next treatment, she came, there was a change, and I could see it on her face, although she was still had a long way to go. But she now had to urinate every hour.
Okay. So there was a huge improvement.
That's a radical improvement in the quality of life, because that means I can now take a quick drive to the shop.
Yes.
Or I can get to the supermarket and be in close proximity to the loo if I need to go to the toilet.
Yeah.
And the problem was her granddaughter then stopped her from coming because her granddaughter believed that this was evil.
Interesting.
And unfortunately, I had to let it go. Unfortunately, you have to, I've said to my students, don't chase people, don't try and convince anybody. And you are going to be very, very frustrated. Not everybody can be helped. Not everybody will be helped. But it's possible that we can have a very positive effect on everybody. Doesn't matter what they're struggling with. Yeah.
So tell me, how did you get involved with doing this acupuncture?
Detox, yeah. Well, I'm a recovering addict. I'm 52 years old now. I started my recovery shortly before my 30th birthday. But what got me to that point was quite a lot of trauma in my life. I wouldn't say severe trauma to the extent of other people, but it's all relative. Ultimately, I was teased every day of my life at school. I was given a nickname which was degrading and humiliated every day of my life in school. So I ended up with a lot of anger, and it made me very volatile. It even drove me to become a bully, and I would snap. But I bullied bullies. So in my opinion bullying is not, so when I saw somebody being bullied, I would act violently in order to protect the person who was being bullied. Almost got me killed. And that's when I decided this isn't working. Also, both my parents died when I was 16, within 4 months of each other.
Oh, that's so tough.
At the time I didn't think it was that bad because I didn't cry. I thought, oh, well, I'm handling this pretty well. But I think the reason I handled it very differently was I also didn't want to feel like a burden to everyone else around me, because I felt like a burden actually already, which is not a good place to be, because that's how I saw myself, as a burden. So I didn't want to make other people's lives uncomfortable, inconvenient now, because now they have to look after me, because I've now got no parents and I'm 16 years old. I thought I was very clever. So I decided I'm just going to live my own life and avoid my family. And I made a lot of mistakes. I made a ton of mistakes. And I had the kind of personality where I was a people pleaser. And alcohol started very, very, very young for me. That was my first addiction. My father was in radio. He was with LM Radio. He was a talk show host, or disc jockey is what they said in those days. And he then came to South Africa, and he was instrumental in starting 5FM and 94.7. I grew up in the halls of the SABC. In those days, it was called Highveld Stereo. It was still part of the SABC. So I grew up in the celebrity world. My dad went into producing, and then because of his own addictions in his life, he struggled to do the work that he wanted to do.
Was he an alcoholic?
Yes, he was. He drank every day. I never saw him drunk. But I think his drinking started the minute I went to bed, because I have literally thousands of memories of waking up and hearing my father getting sick in the toilet or vomiting in the bin next to his bed, because of drinking too much alcohol. My mother was a chain smoker. She smoked 100 cigarettes a day. I saw her tipsy once or twice. So I wouldn't say she was an alcoholic, but she was certainly dependent on alcohol. And when I say she smoked 100 cigarettes a day, you have no idea what it's like. One after the other. Sometimes there was two going at the same time. She would just subconsciously light one while the other one was still going.
How did she pass?
Lung cancer.
Okay.
Give you two guesses.
And your father?
My father, alcohol and cigarettes had a very bad effect on his body. He had arteries replaced in his legs, and he had 3/4 of his stomach removed from ulcers from drinking alcohol. Yet he carried on drinking. And I think after my mother died, he died of a broken heart. But that was in March of my matric year. And so I had to finish matric, carried on living in the home I grew up in. And we had my senile grandmother who was living with us, who was clocking 90 years old. So there was no real adult supervision from that point onwards. Somehow I'd convinced my legal guardian, my late uncle in Durban, to let me stay in the house and finish school, because I didn't want to uproot my life and move to Durban. The climate in Durban just doesn't gel with me. I can't deal with humidity. As you can see, I'm perspiring quite a lot. My body temperature runs quite hot for some reason.
Okay, so you convinced them to let you stay in the house, and so you were unsupervised drinking alcohol.
Correct, and they left a booze cabinet full of booze.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be accepted at school because I was very badly treated at school. So now I was the kid who had no responsibility, no adult supervision, and people would come and drink and do whatever they wanted at my house. My grandmother was in bed by 5 o'clock. She was also stone deaf. So we could do whatever we wanted in the house, and she wouldn't even realize it. When I came home from school, she thought it was my dad coming home from work. She'd say, "How was work today?" And I'd say, "Oh, no, it's fine." And so that's really where my alcohol problem started. And I love getting drunk. It's medicated my uneasiness. It gave me confidence. I was very confident. And how I got accepted by others was I became the joker, So people enjoyed having me around because I kept them laughing. And when I drank alcohol, I had people rolling on the floor with laughter, until I got blackout drunk and passed out and vomited myself. So that's how my experience started with alcohol. I only got involved with drugs at the age of about 24. I bought a car from a car dealership, and the car salesman and I got on very, very well. And he invited me to a bride's house, and the next thing he pulled out a gram of cocaine. And my first reaction was, oh, no, that's cocaine. That's like
heavy stuff.
I always said to myself, I'd never do cocaine or heroin or whatever. Well, that didn't end very well. One line of cocaine and I was hooked. Immediately, I wanted more. I was like, wow, this is amazing. It helped sober me up when I was drunk. So it helped me drink and get drunk and then sober me up so that I could drive. And I drove thousands of times out of my mind. And by the grace of God, of my understanding, I'm here today. I was never in a car accident, was never arrested for anything. Led a very wayward life. My first sexual experience was with a sex worker because I didn't have the confidence to approach young women my age, and another guy in the school that I knew who was also like me, he introduced me to it. And so for me, it became easier. When I needed that intimacy, I would just pay for it. But my conscience was bothering me. So I would always have to be in a very out of my head kind of state of being in order to sear my conscience so I could go through with this act. And then I started to discover, I thought women did that because they wanted to, because they enjoyed sex. So I would ask him, so why do you do this? You enjoy sex. How do I get into this kind of stuff? And some of them are, yeah, I enjoy sex, but some of them are honest. They would say, look, I have children to feed and I can't find a job. So I'm doing it to feed my kids. Or they would say, I use it to pay for my drugs and feed my kids. So when I realized that women didn't want to be there doing this with me, that was even more difficult for me to deal with. And when cocaine came along, the effect that it had on my body in terms of excessive dopamine was it made me extremely horny. I became extremely horny and really wanted to engage in sex. But the problem is that too much cocaine in your body and you are not able to do it anyway. Your veins and your arteries constrict and there's no blood supply and you just cannot engage in it. So it's very, very frustrating, but that kept me safe because I think if I was able to, I probably would have died from some kind of STD.
So you went from alcohol and weed to cocaine, and then how did it worsen from there?
I ran away and did what they call a geographical, ran away to Cape Town. But this place is the problem. Let me go and move to Cape Town. Cape Town is nice, it's beautiful. I won't have a problem there. I'll start a new life. But these things are wherever you go, and wherever you go, you take yourself with you. So I was still the same person. There was no change in my life and my mind and my values and my morals and my decisions. I learned very early on in recovery, if you're a drunken horse thief and you take away the booze, you're still a horse thief. You're just not drunk anymore. So it's not enough to just give up the substance. You've got to engage in a process of change. You've got to change the way you think, change what you think about, which ultimately will guide the kind of choices you make because you're making different choices about doing different things. So I moved to Cape Town and the marijuana scene was very big there. And then I just did marijuana and alcohol. I stayed away from cocaine. But then I discovered ecstasy. And that was, wow, this was a spiritual experience for me because I had never experienced this utter feeling of ecstasy. Being in my own body. That's why they call it ecstasy, this incredible ecstasy of being in your physical body and in your own mind. It's just, for me, it was instantly addictive. And I started popping these things like Smarties, which had a very bad effect on me. I ended up with a very severe depression. Didn't leave the house for 10 days. And I was working for a tourist transport company at the time. I was doing quite well at my job and I was needed there. And the boss came and gave me a business card of a psychologist and said, please go see this guy. You need help. I'll pay for his $2,500 to get you started. But it didn't help me because for 2 years, I just went there every week, once a week, and I just lied to him every time. It's very difficult for me to admit the truth about my life. So he never really knew what was going on with me. He thought he was doing something good because, I was going there and talking about what was going on in my life. But the problem was never dealt with, because the first question he asked me was, do you use drugs and do you drink? And I was like, yeah, I have a couple. Have a couple of drinks, and I'll pop an ecstasy pill every now and then, have a line. But I don't use it excessively. So I lied so he could never help me. Until it got to the point where I was literally homeless, And it just got progressively worse. And then I discovered, in the presence of a sex worker, crack cocaine, which is a very, very quick downward spiral to homelessness. It was 2 or 3 months and I was homeless. And in a lot of debt. And I'd even stolen money from people. So I'd committed crime in order to pay for my habit. And I ended up on the streets of Durban at the end of the day, shortly before my 30th birthday, at the point of suicide. And I'd stolen about 40,000 Rand from my employer at the time. And I went on a crack binge, which I didn't intend coming out of. My life was so painful that I intended to go out on a cloud of bliss. And this 40 grand I went through in 5 days. And, in the presence of sex workers and hotels and wherever. And it got to the point I suddenly had a moment of clarity, and I realized I didn't know how to live life on life's terms. I just had no clue. And life was so painful for me that I decided I wanted to end it all. I had 800 or 900 Rand left, and I had 20 ecstasy pills. And I decided I was going to rent a room in a flea bag hotel in Durban called the Palmerston Hotel, which is just filled with addicts and sex workers and drug dealers and criminals. It stank. The room that I hired for the night cost 60 Rand, I think, back then. And it stank of Jay's fluid. The floor was concrete floor. It was painted red ox blood, like a strip paint. It had one of these spring beds with a mattress on. So
this is where you were planning to commit suicide?
Correct, yeah. But now I needed that bottle of vodka. My plan was to swallow these ecstasy pills one at a time with a bottle of vodka. And just, poison myself that way. So I went to an escort agency because those are the only type of places that are open that time of the morning. And I ordered a triple brandy and Coke and bribed the bouncer to sell me a bottle of vodka. And as I was sitting at the bar, I just decided I was going to pray. I didn't want to die.
But you didn't know how to get out.
I didn't want to live more.
Yes.
And you just want the pain to stop. So I just prayed to the God of my understanding, and I said, look, if you're out there, in half an hour's time, I'm going to end up in this flea bag hotel. I'm going to sit down on the bed. I'm going to swallow these pills one at a time with a bottle of vodka. Hopefully, you're a God of compassion and love, and you don't want me to do this. But also, hopefully, the kind of God I'm interested in needs an invitation from me, because you've given me freedom of choice, and you don't interrupt yourself in my life unless asked, or intervene in anybody's life unless you asked. Or
given permission, correct.
Yeah, so I said, so I'll give you permission, and I hope you will. But in half an hour's time, I'm going to find out whether you will or whether you won't, because I'm not stopping this process. And that was it. I prayed the prayer, and I had about that much left of this glass of triple brandy and Coke. And it was going down very, very quickly. And while this happened, a woman came in off the street. She was a street sex worker, apparently, and sat down at the bar. And she started flirting with me instantly, trying to pick me up. And I was not interested because I'd made my choice. I'm leaving this planet. I totally ignored her. Eventually she got up and she sat next to me and she shook my arm to get my attention. And I looked at her and I said, "What?" She just said to me, "You don't have to do what you're going to do." I was like, how did she know what I was going to do? I didn't tell anybody. And she said, "I've got a 3-bedroom apartment on the beachfront. You can come and stay as long as you like. I don't want money from you. I don't want sex from you. I'm lonely. I need someone to talk to. So you're welcome to come and stay. So there's no need to do what you're going to do." Took out a little till slip from her purse and wrote her name and her phone number down. She said, "There's my number. If you're interested, call me. There's no reason to do what you're going to do." She said that 3 times. And then she left. So I sat there and I kind of stared at this piece of paper, wondering if I'd imagined this whole thing. Because when you've been awake for 5 days, it's a very different state of being. Your brain and your mind work very, very differently. It takes you about 5 to 10 minutes to even process a thought. That's how exhausted you are. And I stared at this piece of paper and I just said to the God of my understanding, I said, "Is this your idea of divine intervention?" And there was no answer. "Yes, it's me, God." There was just phone the number or don't, So I thought, well, there's only one way for me to find out, and it's phone the number, which I did. She invited me, she gave me her address, and then I bribed the bouncer to walk me 3 blocks because I couldn't walk in the street. It was not daylight outside. Durban's a pretty dangerous place, especially if you haven't slept for 5 days and you can't balance properly and people can see that you're pretty high.
Vulnerable, yeah. You're
very vulnerable. And I was seeing shadows moving, sort of, it was like the darkness was coming for me. So I was very afraid, very heightened sense of fear. And he took me to this woman's apartment and left me there. And I knocked on the door and she opened the door, made me a cup of coffee. And from the time I arrived, this woman just would not stop talking. I was like, I wish this woman would shut up. I just want to go sleep. But I couldn't say that to my host who'd given me my own bedroom, sea-facing, and it would be quite rude. So I just had to sit there and listen. What she was telling me a life story, which was quite shocking. She had been sexually abused by her father and her uncle from the age of 8. She'd run away from home at the age of 11, become a sex worker. So this went on and on and on. Eventually she said, "Do you want to go to church?" And I said, "No, not now." She said, "Look, you need friends. If you're going to change your life, you need friends." I said, "Yeah, I know that, but right now I need to sleep. And I need to shower. I stink. I haven't bathed. I stink of urine. You could smell me from a distance." And she said, "Okay, well, I'm going to go." And off she went. She left me alone in her apartment. And I couldn't sleep. From the time she left, there was a little voice in my head. It was like Chinese torture. It was like a dripping tap on my forehead. Just over, like a stuck record, over and over and over. "Tell the truth, Warren. The truth will set you free. Tell the truth will set you free. For once in your life, tell the truth and truth will set you free." Eventually, she got back about 2 hours later. And I opened the door for her and I said, "Can I make you a cup of coffee and can we go to the lounge and can I tell you how I ended up in your house?" And she said, "Yeah." And for a woman who never stopped talking, she didn't interrupt me once. I spoke for about 3 hours in total. Towards the end of my life story and all my confession telling, for the first time in my life, every deep, dark secret, every foul deed that I'd done to another human being and to myself, I confessed. Towards the end, I noticed a look on her face, which I'd never seen before. And it was a look of complete acceptance, complete love and compassion and no judgment, which is not human. Maybe a mother looks at a newborn child like that, unconditional love. But it was very different. It was a much higher sort of unconditional love. It could have also been the drugs, no doubt. But I suddenly had the feeling that I wasn't in the presence of a human being. So I said to her, I stared and looked her in the eyes like this, and I said, "Are you an angel?" And she gave me this funny little smirk, kind of like all-knowing, you've caught me, But she didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just said, carry on with your story. I was too afraid to ask again in case this beam of light came down from the ceiling and said, yes, I'm an angel from heaven, whatever. I was just thought, okay, I'm not going to ask again. So I eventually finished, and she said, so how do you feel? And I said, I feel free. I feel like a new man. I feel light. I feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders.
So how old were you then? 28, 29?
29, shortly before my 30th birthday.
Okay. And so from her house, that was obviously the starting point of your recovery. How
Correct.
long did it take you from that point to feel like you had control of your life?
Well, I went to Johannesburg, got myself on a bus, phoned a friend. They said, get on a bus, come up to Joburg, we'll see what we can do. They sent me to a place in Lenasia, which is for sort of alcoholic, homeless people. There were 5 beds. It was infested with cockroaches. But they took me in and they gave me love and compassion. And
what did that guy say to you?
it was interesting. His name was Raj Baira, an ex-mongrel gangster, tall guy. As I walked up to the entrance to the lounge, he was sitting in a chair facing the entrance. And he looked at me and said, I've seen that look before. The look of self-entitlement. You think the world owes you a favor. He said, the world owes you nothing. He says, unless you can change he said, the grand sum total of your beliefs and your opinions brought you here. So it stands to reason there's nothing we can learn from you. Because I don't know if you've noticed, this is a place for hobos. And this is where you've ended up. And it was just truth bomb after truth bomb. It was like a force hitting me in the chest, kind of whacking the last bit of attitude out of me. And then he said, you've got 2 of these and 1 of these. If I were you, I'd shut up and listen while you're here. Maybe your life will get better. And you've got to change that attitude of self-entitlement to gratitude. He said, because if you think your life is bad now, it can get much worse, my friend. To me, that was pretty bad. So he turned out to be an ex-gangster who'd spent most of his life in jail. He'd murdered more people than he could remember. But he totally turned his life around and become a caretaker in this place. He would take homeless people off the street covered in their own vomit, stinking with lice, and he'd bath them and, feed them. And so I was like, wow, this is a very different human being. This is a man who's really turned his life around. And so that's where I'd wake up in the morning covered in dead cockroaches because they'd be crawling on me in my sleep. And I'd say, thank you for this dead cockroach. Thank you for that dead cockroach. It was the beginning of winter, the end of May. The beginning of May, and it was cold. There's no hot water. We had to boil hot water in a bucket with an element. Food, we ate pup, just mealie meal. And sometimes Indian food, a bit of curry.
Nice.
And the Hare Krishnas would come by and they'd just walk in, fill your pots and walk out. They wouldn't say a word, which I thought was fascinating. They didn't want anything. There was nothing in return. They didn't preach. They just came in and fed you and left, which I found very impressive. And so that's where I started. And the report that my friends were given was he's done very well here. And they said, okay. And they got me into another place called Hands of Compassion. I spent 9 months there. And then I started working. Got a job.
Helping other addicts recover or?
No, I just got a job, a normal job.
Okay.
I was selling copiers and faxes.
Okay.
By telling the truth. The boss said to me, so there's a gap here in your CV. What have you been doing? And I said, well, I'm a recovering addict. And I ended up homeless on the streets. I've just spent 9 months in recovery and now I'm looking for a job. And he said, I appreciate your honesty. I think I'm going to give you a chance.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And he said, so how are you going to get here? Do you have a car? And I said, no. I thought the ad said basic plus com plus car. He said, no, read the next line. I said, car allowance. I said, oh, no. Oh, sorry, I don't want to waste your time. I don't have a car. He said, why did you answer this ad? I said, because it said car. You need a car to get around Johannesburg. And he said, I appreciate your honesty. You're very candid. And he said, I'll tell you what, I've got a little Uno panel van here sitting in our workshop. I've got too many at the moment for our service division. I'll let you use that. How's that? You just pay for petrol. He said, I'll pay for insurance. I'll pay for everything else. You just pay for petrol. So I got my first job, started working. And then I went and studied counseling at nights. And it was the first thing in my new life that I paid off. They allowed me to pay off my counseling course. And then I ran a support group for 2 years at the Rehabs church on a Friday night. But after 2 years, I had a very low success rate. The people I was trying to help just weren't working. I was about to give up. And I went to go see a friend of mine. He said to me, Warren, man is a 3-part being, spirit, soul, and body. When people come into treatment, we're working with the soul, the mind, the will, and the emotions, and the desires. But you've got to treat the body as well. And this made sense to me. And he said, there's this hospital in New York. They've been doing this for a very long time. They have the highest success rate in the world. Even the US government pays for recovery in New York, and veterans that come back from war with post-traumatic stress disorder use it. The government pays for it. I was like, wow, that's amazing. And I just went online. I just searched for it. I went and looked for the results, because results is what I was looking for. I didn't actually go and learn what auricular therapy was. He told me it was auricular therapy. And to me, my logic or my limited understanding of what detoxification meant was, detox is like the 10-day Kellogg's all-bran diet, where the woman eats all bran and then she has a nice poop and she's floating on a cloud. That was for me the detox. Obviously it's diet.
So you were saying that you went to the States, you learned about the technique.
Well, I arrived there.
Back to South Africa.
I arrived there and the guy offered me acupuncture, and I was like, why do you want to give me acupuncture? And he said, well, that's what auricular therapy means. I was horrified because it didn't make sense to me how acupuncture could work. But he said, why did you come here? I said, because I want results. He said, well, you're going to have to learn ear acupuncture.
What's the phrase you used? The oracle?
The oracle.
The oracle.
Listens to the oracle.
Listens to the oracle.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that very much.
So, and I learned it was acupuncture, and he gave me a treatment, and it was life-changing for me. I was on antidepressants and tranquilizers at the time because I'd gone through a relationship that had ended, and my first real breakup from a real relationship. I was quite emotionally immature, and I was really struggling, and I went to the doctor, and he put me on Prozac and tranquilizer, sleeping pills. And this guy put the needles in my ears, and the following day I just took all my medicine, threw it in the bin. I just felt like I didn't need it. So I was convinced from the first day that, wow, this is going to be amazing because I can feel it, what it's done for me. So, yeah, that's how I got into it.
Mm-hmm. Incredible story. Incredible work that you're doing. I would like to see this more often as a treatment. No general practitioner that I've ever been to has ever mentioned it. No healing facilitator. Like I said, I've never heard of this before. So I'm glad that we are bringing it to light in more ways. And I'd love to come for a session. It sounds like something that I would even be keen to learn how to practice. Is it difficult to learn?
It's like putting a key in a keyhole. I think if you can put a key in a keyhole, you can do this. That's the most difficult thing to overcome is your fear of the unknown. Sticking a needle into another human being is this, anxiety. But if you can flick someone's ear, you can put a needle in the ear. It's the same thing. Okay. It's just learning where to put it and how to do it. But otherwise, it's very easy.
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to add or end off with that we didn't mention?
No, I think we've pretty much covered everything in a nutshell. But if anybody does want to learn, they can just Google AcuDetox in South Africa, and they'll find my websites, and they can find lists of practitioners all across the country. I've trained about 500 practitioners in South Africa.
Incredible. And you said you have an online course as well.
Yeah, I've got an online course and I teach in person as well.
How much is the course to do?
It's going for 6,999, so 7,000 Rand at the moment.
And how long does it take?
Really, it's up to you. It could take you a month. It could take you 5 years. There's no time limit. It depends on how motivated you are.
Okay.
The ball is in your court.
That's awesome. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, Warren. It's
Thank you
been
for
a
having me,
pleasure
Dan.
to meet you and hear your story. It's very impactful work that you're doing, as I said, and you've come through a lot to be at this place of healing on your journey. And I wish you nothing but success for the future. Awesome. Thank you very much for joining us once again. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. If there's anyone that you would like to see on the next episode, please let us know. And if you would like to contact Warren to go for a session or to learn more about his online program, I will put his details in the caption below. For now, goodbye. Cheers, Warren.
Bye-bye. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Sure.